I think some of that change is necessary, but I think when you've got a city saying that they would remove some of these barriers and then failing to do it and leaving the city looking a mess makes it hard for retailers to be able to be successful.
Michael, thank you very much for being with us. That's Michael Barnett, the CEO of the Auckland Chamber of Commerce. Do you agree with Michael there, or do you think he's being a bit unfair?
I think his focus is a bit disappointing, because he talks about, it's difficult to get around the city. Or what he means is it's difficult for cars to get around the city. And this entire conversation has been predicated upon people driving around the city, and yet we spent the last 10 minutes prior to that talking about whether or not people want to be using rail. And we mentioned Commercial Bay, which is directly over the road from Britomart, the train station. So maybe we need to have a complete paradigm shift here in Auckland, which should at least have a fantastic rail network, has a serviceable rail network, and it's what we should be encouraging people to use, not relying on cars all the time.
But until you've got alternatives, Steve, and this makes me so wild that people bang on about cycleways and about buses and rail and what have you. That's great, but if you haven't got it there, and I don't mean you personally, but people should not be castigating people who have got 2 kids, need to do the groceries, do the school pickup, do the ballet drop-off, whatever. We need to be able to get around. So if cities are not going to provide proper, usable, workable alternatives, then get off the car drivers' backs.
No, apparently you can buy these new electric bikes, which you can take your 1 or 2 children and the ballet flats or the hockey sticks in. You can actually have extra add-ons for your electric bike to do that.
I haven't seen them. I saw them when we were in Amsterdam, and actually you couldn't pay me to go on their cycleways because the scooters use them as well. It was like Russian roulette.
But Ali, what you're saying makes sense with regard to more suburban areas, and absolutely, even in Auckland it's just as bad. There is no public transport provision once you get away from the business districts of the city. But as long as you're saying Queen Street and Newmarket and places like that, you have got excellent public transport provision, and in that case it should be getting used more and less reliance on cars in that instance.
How do you get from the suburb though, Steve? So because I'm not sure how Auckland works.
Well, in many places like Pukekohe Papakura, for example, where I'm based, we've got really good park and ride provisions. You drive to the station, you park your car, you hop on the train, and then you're in the city centre.
Phil Sparky says, I'm a tradie and don't do work in the Auckland CBD anymore due to the ridiculous parking. I got a ticket for $150 for apparently having one of my front tyres touching a yellow line next to my space, and it clearly wasn't. The job I was attending was worth $60, so to heck with the CBD, I thought. So there's Phil the Sparky, who does not go into the Auckland CBD anymore. Do you think, finally, we should actually take a bit of time to have a national Be Kind to Parking Wardens Day, Ali Jones?
Oh, God, if I say no, this is
Go on.
an awful question.
Say what you mean.
No, I think we should be nice to everyone. No, I don't think we need to single parking wardens out. No
Why
one
not?
should be.
They get so much flack.
Well, they shouldn't. That's what I'm saying is no one should be making an
So
exception.
let's have a national day.
Well, we don't
Steve?
need. No.
Parking wardens are people too.
You'd be nice to everyone all the time. That's
Thank
what
you.
I'm
Yes,
saying.
something we agree on, Ali.
Yes.
Ali Jones, Steve McCabe, thank you very much for your time. I'm back tomorrow, 3:45. Checkpoint next. See you later.
Whakarongo mai koe ki te reo irirangi o Aotearoa. This is Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm Lisa Owen. E Haere Akine, the woman who broke out of isolation so her children could see their father's body before he was buried, explains why she felt she had no other choice. Meanwhile, a brief bid for freedom lasts all of 50 metres for another isolator who tried to gap it. An investigation into the COVID-19 patient privacy breach confirms political motives and National Party culprits. As Victoria records 723 new cases of COVID-19 overnight, authorities go door to door to check on positive cases and are horrified to find some have gone to work. And the classic OE is on hold. We ask school leavers what their plans are beyond the classroom.
RNZ News at 5. Kia ora ko Susana Leata tēnei. A person has been caught after briefly escaping from managed isolation at Auckland's Crown Plaza. The head of managed isolation and quarantine, Air Commodore Darren Webb, says at 1 o'clock the 32-year-old man attempted to follow a staff member out of the gate, claiming he was a worker. He says the man refused to show identification to staff, who challenged him and then escaped onto Albert Street. Witness Christine Madden says the man was chased down the road by 2 security guards, a police officer and a soldier.
I saw 2 security guards and a guy wearing a mask just walking along the street. Then I saw a cop running at speed with a mask on, so I figured he'd come from Crown Plaza. And then a soldier was also running behind. He actually tried to sidestep the cop to keep walking down the road, but they apprehended him, obviously, and put handcuffs on him and walked him back to the Crown Plaza.
The man arrived from Brisbane yesterday and has not yet been tested for COVID-19. He will appear in court at a later date. A mother who has admitted escaping managed isolation with her 4 children says she felt she was left with no other option. The family returned to New Zealand from Australia after the children's father died unexpectedly. 4 members of the family have pleaded guilty to charges they faced after climbing over a wall at their isolation hotel. The mother, who cannot be identified for legal reasons, has told Checkpoint she had applied for an exemption for them to see the man's body, but was facing delays. On the eve of the man's tangi, she says she felt like time was running out and made the decision to flee. You can hear the full interview on Checkpoint shortly. The National Party leader says outgoing MP Hamish Walker has paid the price for his role in a serious breach of 18 COVID patients' privacy. Mr Walker is quitting Parliament at the election after admitting to leaking the highly sensitive information to media provided to him by former party president Michelle Bogue. An inquiry has confirmed their actions were politically motivated and that they should take full responsibility. Judith Collins says there have been serious consequences for both Ms Bogue and Hamish Walker.
He's made a big error of judgment, and it was a very foolish and totally unwise thing for him to do. He's actually lost his career. What he hasn't done is he hasn't, so far as we're aware, committed a criminal offence.
Judith Collins says the leak is not condoned by the National Party. Ms Bogue turned down RNZ's request for an interview. Mr Walker has not responded to a request for comment. It's been revealed a New Zealander who tested positive for COVID-19 on his arrival in South Korea had also travelled to Milford Sound and joined a boat cruise. This afternoon, the Director General of Health announced that the man had travelled to Queenstown and Manurewa and that surveillance testing was being done to rule out community transmission. Now the Southern District Health Board says that testing has expanded to Fiordland as well. It says it successfully contact traced the passengers he shared a bus with to Milford and those who joined him on the cruise. Nobody who has come in contact with the man has yet tested positive for the virus. Outgoing Labour MP Claire Curran is the latest to criticise Parliament's toxic culture. Another outgoing MP, National's Sarah Dowie, used her valedictory speech to speak about the difference in treatment women MPs receive and her negative experiences with the media. Ms Curran, who failed to declare 2 meetings and used her private email account for ministerial business in 2018, is retiring from politics at the election. She says political reporting has become destructive and she fears it would take a politician committing suicide for anything to change.
You guys need to turn the mirror on yourselves as well and take responsibility for how you report things and how you comment on us. Because if you just go and ask anybody in the street, they will be disgusted at some of the political reporting that is happening in our country.
Outgoing Labour MP Claire Curran. The police have launched a homicide investigation following a hit and run in Christchurch today. Officers were called to where a man was fatally struck by a vehicle on 4 Elms Place in Parklands just after 8:30 this morning. A black Mazda Primacy, believed to be involved in the hit and run, has been found and police are still looking for its male driver. It's 4.5 minutes past 5. Christchurch will host the largest crowd for a domestic netball game when the Tactics host the Northern Stars in their ANZ Premiership match at Horncastle Arena tonight. More than 5,000 fans will fill the stands, at which will be the largest crowd outside of a Silver Ferns test. It'll also be the first game outside of Auckland or outside the Auckland hub, where all the teams have had to travel since the competition restarted amid COVID-19. However, it'll be the Tactics' only home game as Horncastle Arena is booked out over the next month. Coach Marianne Delaney-Hoshik says while it's disappointing, getting one home game is better than none.
If they didn't get to see live netball this year, it would be a huge disadvantage even for the future of netball in this zone. I feel like with having a game in Christchurch, at least all the kids get to come and connect and see live netball and see how fantastic it is.
Meanwhile, next year's Netball World Youth Cup in Fiji has been postponed because of the COVID-19 pandemic. The 20-team tournament was due to be held in Suva in June. The New Zealand Rugby League coach Michael Maguire expects to speak with Sonny Bill Williams about his international allegiance and hopes to have him available for the Kiwis. Williams is due to arrive in Sydney tomorrow for 2 weeks in quarantine before he makes his NRL return to the Sydney Roosters. The Kiwis don't have any end-of-year tests locked in, but are still hopeful of playing at least 2 late in the year. That's the news.
US politics.
And he's got this high approval rating, so why don't I have a high approval rating? They're highly thought of, but nobody likes me. It can only be my personality, that's all.
Local politics.
It's a bit rich for Winston to suggest that we're not trustworthy when, in fact, they are the ones who have been entirely slippery.
And leaving politics.
One woman said to me recently, "Sarah, you were absolutely trashed in the media in 2019.
Your daily political digest. Morning report weekdays from 6 on air and online.
Now the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow. Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Mostly cloudy with isolated light showers. For the remainder of the North Island, areas of morning cloud or fog. Otherwise mostly fine with high cloud. Nelson, Buller and Westland north of Fox Glacier mostly cloudy with isolated light showers. Southern Westland and Fiordland periods of rain, heavy at times tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury mainly fine with high cloud. Areas of low cloud about the coast tonight. Otago and Southland mostly cloudy, scattered light rain clearing for a time today. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, it's 7 minutes past 5.
Thanks, Susanna. Welcome to Checkpoint. I'm Lisa Owen. The Heron inquiry into the leak of COVID-19 cases coming up. But we begin tonight with a mother who's admitted escaping managed isolation with her 4 children. The mother, who Checkpoint cannot name for legal reasons, says she was panicked. Her children were extremely distressed and she had no other options after being left in limbo by authorities. The family that lives in Australia returned to New Zealand after the children's father died unexpectedly from a stroke. The woman says they watched him take his last breath via video link and then travelled to Auckland the next day with the intention of applying for a compassionate exemption to attend his tangi. 4 members of the family yesterday pleaded guilty in the Hamilton Youth Court after climbing over a wall at their isolation hotel. 4 of them were caught almost immediately, but the woman's 17-year-old son was able to get to Auckland. The family was in isolation in Hamilton when their initial request for an exemption was turned down. So the 37-year-old mother made a second application to view the man's body before he was buried.
Plan B was to have their father brought down to a facility that was only 5 minutes down the road. We were told that it was used during the level 4 lockdown. It was a managed facility and that the Army, the Defence and the isolation management team were backing our plan to facilitate a visit for him to be viewed in this facility. So we had everything put in place, just 5 minutes down the road so that my children could say goodbye. So that was what we were waiting for. That was in the morning that it happened. We were told we would get an answer at 4 o'clock that afternoon. So we're also in communication with the family back in Auckland that were with the body. And so everyone's basically waiting for the all green. 4 o'clock came, we had no answer. We were told at 4 o'clock to wait till 5 o'clock. At 5 o'clock, still no answer. We were then told we'd get an answer at 6 o'clock. At 6 o'clock, I spoke with my family. They asked, what was happening. They needed to know because it was getting, it was quite late, and we don't move the body at night time. Uplifting their father's body at night time is quite distressing to the family and to us. And we still hadn't got our answer at 6. And about 6:30, I think maybe 6:15, a police officer did phone me. And he did say that he was the officer that would be supervising if we get released, but he didn't have an answer, and that he would get back to me at 8 o'clock.
So,
at this point, sorry.
To be clear, the tangi was planned for the very next day, was it?
Yes, it was now about 13 hours until he was going to be buried. It was the following morning at 10 o'clock he was to be buried.
Commodore Webb has stated publicly that the family was told that your application was looking positive and there would be a decision by 8 p.m. that night.
No, we were never told that the application was looking positive. We were never, ever given that indication. All we were being told was 4 o'clock, 5 o'clock, 6 o'clock and 8 o'clock. This is all that was happening throughout the day. We were never told. If I had been told that, we would not be in this predicament. This would never have happened. We would never have left the facility.
So did they tell you that to expect a decision by 8 p.m.?
They said I would get a phone call at 8. So at 4 o'clock, we would get a phone call at 5. At 5 o'clock, we would get a phone call at 6. At 6 o'clock, still had no word. We made contact. I made contact with my family because they were sitting there waiting for the decision. Then I got a phone call about 6:15 to say we would get a phone call at 8 o'clock. We were never told that it was looking promising, that it was nothing like that was said.
So what did you decide to do?
So at that point, I was looking at my children. They were looking at me because we were waiting for an answer, and all my children were doing was sitting there crying, looking confused, and I just looked at them, and I was just really hurt. I felt like I'd failed them as a mother. It's very hard to look at your children, especially my youngest. She was broken. And so at that point, my children wanted to leave and go to their father. And so it was just a decision made on the spot. It's time to go to your father. And so we did leave the facility.
How did you do that? Can you explain to me how you got out?
How I got out? I did. There was a window in the there was a window in our room. Basically, I just there were 2 screws in the window, and I did use something to unscrew the latch on the window.
What was that? Do you remember?
I just used something from the kitchen, and I just used it to unscrew the latch. Nothing was broken. There was nothing broken. The window was not damaged. It was just 2 screws that hold the latch to the window, and I just unscrewed it, just like you would with a screwdriver.
And then what?
And then I opened the window, and my daughter, we all just left the facility through the window and over a fence. And
where were you going to? Because the body obviously was in Auckland at this point. So what was the plan from this point onwards? I wasn't sure if this was even doable. You know, I got to say that I wasn't sure if this was doable. I didn't even think that we would make it past the actual fence. Once I got out, I jumped over and I saw that it was, and my daughter followed. And so basically once we got out, we just ran to the park across the road, and I wanted to catch a taxi to their father. And 4 of us were caught, and my son made it to Auckland, to where his father was. And keeping in mind too, we were aware of all the safety precautions that needed to keep in place. We had all had our masks on when we were caught. My son had his mask on, and the intention was just to see him, for my children to say goodbye to their father, spend some, their father's last moments with his children. And I honestly believe that the system failed us, and we are where we are today. Did you call anyone or discuss with anyone your plans to escape isolation?
About 15, 20 minutes prior to, so we got the phone call from the officer to say to wait till 8 o'clock? Yes, I did.
So you called someone to let them know you were breaking out?
That I was leaving, that we had run out of time, yes.
Was that person coming to assist you by driving you to Auckland?
Yes, they were, but but I didn't know that this was possible. So it was, if I get out, are you able to come down and get us?
Right. Because people listening to this will think that that's a plan, isn't it? That's a plan.
That is not a plan I made that decision after that phone call. If I had planned to escape, if this was premeditated, I would have gone the first day. I would have gone the second day. I would have gone the third day. This was done after that phone call when I knew that we were running out of time. My children knew that they were running out of time.
Explain to me that split second where you make the decision. You realise this man, the father of your children, is going to be buried the next morning. You're waiting and you don't know if you will be able to take them there to see him for one last time. What is going through your head right then?
I was panicked. I was panicking. I was panicking because I was running out of time. My children were looking at me, waiting for me to give them that answer that, yes, Mum, we can, that yes, we can go. It all depends. They were just looking at me like I was the one they wanted the answer to come from me that we were allowed to go. And I was doing everything I possibly could in my power. I explored every single option. This was not a choice that I made. I did not come to New Zealand. I did not come here to ruin my life or my children's. I have a good job. I work in the aged care and disability sector in Australia. So I have built such a good life in Australia. I didn't plan for this to happen.
So why didn't you wait an hour and 45 minutes for that decision at 8 o'clock when they told you it would come at 8?
They told me that they would give me a phone call back at 8 o'clock. They told me they would give me a phone call at 4 o'clock. They told me they would give me a phone call at 5. They told me they'd give me a phone call at 6. Keeping in mind that the next morning he's about to be buried. And you also got to keep in mind that we have to transport his body it's an hour and a half from Auckland where he was laying and an hour and a half back. So, there's not much time to do all this. We were running out of time.
Was there any possibility that the tangi could have been delayed to enable you to go?
No, at this stage it was he had been laying about 5-6 days now, and from just looking at him through the video calls, it was time that he needed to go. His body was starting to deteriorate. I remember looking at his face through the video calls.
But earlier, could a decision have been made earlier? Knowing that you were coming from Australia and you may be faced with 2 weeks' worth of isolation and that you might not get an exemption, could a decision have been made then?
I honestly didn't believe that people would be so uncompassionate towards a situation like this that we would not be allowed to see their father. I can come to terms with us not seeing him being allowed to travel up to Auckland to his funeral, but why would they not give us the okay in the morning when this safe plan was put forward at about 9 o'clock in the morning, backed by all the staff, by the health board, by the army, by the defence, by the isolation management? Why could they not give us an answer that morning? Why were we left to wait into those hours of the night?
Do you think that they ever intended to give you the go-ahead to view the body?
Definitely not. Definitely not. This is their father. And I remember Air Commodore when he stated, what did he state? He said that we requested to attend a family member's funeral. He did not say, this was not just a family member. He failed to state that it was their father. This was not just a family member, an extended family member. This was my children's father.
Is there anything in his history or your family's history, do you think, that would have counted against you in terms of this decision?
I honestly don't know why they did this to us. I honestly don't understand why they did this to us, why we were different to everyone else.
You have to stay here now for sentencing, and that is some way off. What does it mean for you?
My job is at risk. We had only intended to come for the funeral, spend about a week or two with their father at the gravesite, and head straight back to Brisbane and obviously do 2 weeks isolation in Brisbane. We've been put off our court cases, not to my daughter's one is in September. I'm in the last days of August, and so have my other children. They've been put also in August, so we're going to be here for quite some time. And honestly, I don't regret what I did. I did what was right by my children. I honestly feel like they failed me and my family. I've lived in New Zealand all my life. I honestly believe that the system failed us. And, you know, it's not just me in this. You know, if you think about people are going to die every day. This is going to happen. You know, families need closure. My children will never have that closure. It has ruined them for the rest of their life. Emotionally and mentally, it has ruined them. I have to now listen to my daughter at night crying while she sleeps. And all she says is she's apologising to her father for not making it to him. And I have to listen while she's sleeping, speaking to her father, that she is sorry that she didn't get to say goodbye. And, you know, all we asked was for a bit of compassion. All we asked was for an hour to view their father's body so that they could say goodbye, because now I have to think of the effects that it's going to have on them for the rest of their lives. And they didn't allow them to say goodbye.
And that is the mother who's pleaded guilty to escaping isolation with her children. They were going to view their father's body before his tangi. It is 22 minutes past 5 and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. I'm sure you'll have some views on that. Do let us know what you think. Are we doing this the right way? Do we need to be more compassionate? How can we handle this differently? Do we even have to change the way we're doing it? You can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The inquiry into the leak of COVID-19 details has confirmed what we already knew. The National MP, Hamish Walker, and former party president, Michelle Bogue, are chiefly to blame. But the Ministry of Health isn't off the hook entirely. Ms Bogue turned down RNZ's request for an interview. Hamish Walker did not respond to our messages. Here's our Deputy Political Editor, Craig McCulloch.
It was the leak which began the opposition's unravelling. Today, a definitive finding as to how it played out.
This was a disgraceful and grubby act carried out by two National Party members for political purposes.
The State Services Commissioner, Chris Hipkins, ordered an inquiry in early July after 3 media outlets, including RNZ, were leaked the private details of COVID-19 patients. The investigation got a lot simpler the very next day, with Hamish Walker and Michelle Bogue coming forward to confess.
That was a great help, actually.
Mike Heron, QC, was the man called on to carry out the investigation. It concludes the leak was deliberate and politically motivated. The timeline goes like this. On July the 2nd, Mr Walker issued a media release warning of an influx of people arriving in Southland from India, Pakistan and Korea. It was labelled racist by many, including Government Minister Megan Woods. At the time, Mr Walker told RNZ that was not fair.
Calling me a racist is Labor's default tactic when they are unable to defend their blatant failures.
Mr Walker told the inquiry he was distressed, upset and under pressure, and so turned to a National Party stalwart, Michelle Bogue.
I'm not talking to anyone and I don't appreciate being doorstopped.
Ms Bogue had been receiving regular email updates of those in quarantine due to her role as acting chief of the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust. She sent on the spreadsheet to Mr Walker, who passed it on to media.
Any system is vulnerable to the actions of persons who seek to misuse confidential information. The responsibility for that lies, of course, with Mr Walker and Ms Bogue.
But that does not mean the Ministry of Health is completely in the clear. Mr Heron questions first why the information was being sent out without encryption or password protection, and second, why it was being sent at all, given the lack of community spread. He says in his view the distribution should have stopped as early as May. The Deputy State Services Commissioner, Helene Quilter, says the Ministry of Health should have reviewed its policy and did not.
But let's not forget, the Ministry of Health was operating in the context of a global pandemic. I'm not going to criticise the Ministry of Health beyond that when lives have been saved as a result of their actions.
The Ministry has apologised to the patients affected and commissioned an audit of its handling of all COVID-19 information. It's also issued a breach of contract notice to the Rescue Helicopter Trust, reminding them of their obligations. The Director General, Ashley Bloomfield, says no patient information is now being shared outside of the ministry.
The transmission of the information via email could have been done more securely, and we will now, of course, if we are sharing that information with organisations who need it, we will ensure there is encryption of the information or that that's password secured.
For now, that's where the matter lies. Both Mr Walker and Ms Bogue assured the inquiry that they have deleted the information. Mr Heron hasn't checked that, but he has taken them at their word.
They've certainly expressed sincere regret. I've found them candid, and frankly, they have had consequences, pretty severe consequences.
Mr Walker has announced he'll retire at the election. Ms Bogue has resigned from her roles with the National Party and the Helicopter Trust. The report has been sent on to the Privacy Commissioner to now consider, as well as the Speaker, Trevor Mallard, and Nationals leader Judith Collins.
It's a very big lesson to people that you can't play politics with other people's private medical records.
Ms Collins will be hoping that marks the end of the saga and the end of the self-inflicted damage to the opposition. From Parliament for Checkpoint, Craig McCulloch.
And we'll hear from the Privacy Commissioner, John Edwards, after 6 o'clock tonight. We've also just received a statement from the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust saying it accepts the findings of the report. The statement goes on to say the Trust has conducted an internal review and have engaged with the Ministry of Health and with the Office of the Privacy Commissioner to ensure our privacy policies and procedures are robust and completely fit for purpose, says the Chairman, Simon Tompkins. We are committed to the best possible outcomes for all patients. Their welfare is our number one priority, and we take our responsibility in protecting their privacy very seriously. We regret the actions of our previous acting CEO, and our thoughts are with those people whose privacy was breached. And that statement is from Simon Tompkins, who is the chairman of the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust, where Michelle Bogue was previously acting CEO. Another person has briefly escaped from a managed isolation hotel in Auckland after tailgating a staff member. The man attempted to follow a staff member out of the gate at the Crowne Plaza, claiming he was a worker, but only managed to make it about 50 metres or so. He had arrived from Brisbane yesterday and has yet to have a COVID test, but has now been charged over the escape. The incident comes after one new case of COVID-19 in managed isolation today, and 90 days since a case was acquired locally and from an unknown source. Nita Blake-Person reports.
It was a brief bid to make it beyond the Crowne Plaza Hotel in Auckland for the 32-year-old returnee. Witnesses say authorities were quickly onto him.
And then the police just come up and turn them around, put some handcuffs on them and walk them back. Yeah, his mask is still over there. Hope someone picks it up. It's not going to be me anyway.
The Minister in charge of managed isolation, Megan Woods, says he didn't make it far.
This isn't someone that just simply wandered out the front door. They saw an opportunity of a staff member leaving the facility who had to go through the fence and essentially tailgated out there. What I take a great deal of comfort from is that the systems worked. This was observed and he was immediately brought back in.
She says police handcuffed the man and brought him back. Authorities are now investigating to see if any contact tracing has to be done. Elsewhere in the country, there was one new case of COVID-19 in managed isolation, a woman in her 20s who had travelled from Ireland via Dubai. Her positive result was from day 3 testing, and she was transferred to a quarantine facility in Auckland from the Ridges in Rotorua. But beyond managed isolation, the Minister of Health, Chris Hipkins, says daily test numbers and the 7-day average have consistently lagged behind the target of 4,000 people a day.
The testing numbers in the community are still not at the level that we are aiming for, and we do need more to be done in that area. So while we've issued new guidance to GPs and we're continuing our focus on testing at the border and in isolation and quarantine facilities, we're still not seeing the numbers overall that we want to see. So one of the issues that we are facing, and let's be frank about this, is that people are reluctant to be tested. And that is something that we all need to play our part in. My message to all New Zealanders is if you're offered a test, you should take asked to be tested, you should take the test.
The Director General of Health, Dr Ashley Bloomfield, has confirmed that a second test of the man who tested positive in South Korea after leaving New Zealand was also positive. However, he said all testing of contacts in New Zealand that had returned tests had been negative.
Right from the start, we have been considering 4 possibilities for this case. First of all, it may have been a false positive result. That's now been ruled out. The second is that it may have been an old infection that has returned a positive result, and we have seen those here before, and they have been widely described internationally. The third is that the case acquired their infection during their travel from New Zealand to South Korea, in particular during quite a lengthy transit period in Singapore. And the fourth is, of course, that the case may have acquired the infection more recently in New Zealand, and the latter is the one we are working to rule out.
Dr Bloomfield said further surveillance testing was being done to rule out the possibility of community transmission around the case.
We also want to do some further surveillance in the 2 places where we know the person has been in the 3 weeks or so before they left New Zealand. That is in South Auckland, particularly around Manurewa, and also in Queenstown. So I am suggesting that anybody who has been in Queenstown from the 1st to the 4th of July, a very short period, and this was before the school holidays, but anyone who's been there who may have had or has symptoms or may be concerned, please do get a test. And likewise, if people in Manurewa have symptoms, you will be offered, you should seek advice and get a test, and others who may be concerned, please do reach out.
More than 460,000 tests have been taken so far, about 9% of New Zealanders. Mō te hōtaka o te ahiahi nei, ko Nita Blake Person, aho.
Coming up on Checkpoint on RNZ National, Victoria's in lockdown, but not everyone's staying at home, as the state recorded 723 new cases and 13 deaths overnight. Authorities go door to door to check on those who have tested positive and find some people have gone to work or even the supermarket. The Waitangi Tribunal hears a call from Māori leaders for Oranga Tamariki to share resources with iwi organisations, and a new political poll is out tonight. Will it turn National's tide? Well, we will have the latest. We'd love to hear from you about anything you've heard on the programme this evening. Get in touch about how we should handle compassionate exemptions with managed isolation. It's going to be with us for a while, isolation and quarantine, or your thoughts on the Heron inquiry into that COVID-19 patient leak. We'd love to hear from you. The text is 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ, or email is checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. Time now for the headlines with Susanna.
A mother who has pleaded guilty to escaping managed isolation in Hamilton with her 4 children doesn't regret what she did. The family returned to New Zealand from Australia after the children's father died unexpectedly. The woman, who cannot be identified for legal reasons, has told Checkpoint they were waiting for an exemption to view the body for so long it felt like time was running out. She says she can not believe the family has been shown so little compassion and feels the system has failed them. A man has been charged under the COVID-19 Public Health Response Act after escaping from managed isolation in Auckland's Crown Plaza Hotel today. The 32-year-old, who arrived from Brisbane yesterday, snuck out claiming he was a worker, but only got about 100 metres before he was arrested. A witness says he was chased down by 2 security guards, a police officer and a soldier. The Health Minister, Chris Hipkins, has called the actions of the 2 people found responsible for the COVID-19 patient breach disgraceful and grubby. An inquiry has confirmed National MP Hamish Walker and former party President Michelle Bogue should take full blame for leaking the personal details of 18 active coronavirus cases to the media. A New Zealander who tested positive for the virus on his arrival in South Korea had also travelled to Milford Sound and joined a boat cruise. Surveillance testing for Queenstown and Manurewa, where it was previously announced the man had visited, has now been extended to Fiordland to rule out community transmission. No contacts have yet tested positive. The police are appealing for information following a fatal hit and run in Christchurch. A man was killed after being struck by a vehicle on 4 Elms Place in Parklands just after 8:30 this morning. A homicide investigation is underway and officers are looking for a male driver. Those are the latest headlines from RNZ National. Our next news and weather update is at 6.
Thanks, Susanna, and kia ora anō. This is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen, and it's time for the business news now with Nicholas Poynton. Okay, Nicholas, you've got a business outlook for us. So they're more upbeat about their own individual positions. So why are they still so deeply pessimistic about the broader outlook?
So these are the findings that come out of ANZ's latest business confidence survey. And one of the questions they ask businesses is how you're feeling about your current outlook. And after speaking with ANZ today, they clarified to me that the results out of this, they tend to reflect how businesses are feeling about operations on the ground, how things are looking. And since we've come out of lockdown, a lot of businesses would say that things are looking a lot better. So hence that sort of maybe explains some of the optimism. But one of the other main questions that they ask in the survey that we sort of closely follow is how businesses are feeling about the broader economic outlook. And this is much more forward-looking. They ask businesses to sort of survey the horizon and how do they feel about going forward. And obviously you've got the uncertainty associated with COVID-19, but one of the other factors is we're coming up to an election. So a lot of businesses, they'll be weighing up and sort of evaluating the situations depending on who may or who may not win. And so this is why businesses are a little bit more negative around this. But to the survey, though, on the surface, it does look pretty positive. A lot of the indicators across the board are up on the previous month in June, but they are all still in negative territory for the most part. But compared with the expectations, compared with the early expectations we had at the beginning of the month, they're actually slipped a little bit. And I spoke to ANZ's chief economist, Sharon Zollner, and she says this can be put down to the surge in cases we actually saw in Australia. So although Australia isn't one of our major export partners, we do rely on them a lot, and they buy a lot of our agricultural manufacturing goods. So she puts that down to maybe one of the main reasons why we saw a bit of slippage. And there are some other things that we can sort of glean from these results, and one of them is that the sharp rebound we've seen in activity since lockdown, we're actually starting to sort of see that peter out, level out a bit. And Sharon Zollner, she put this quite well. She says we're kind of in the eye of the storm at the moment. We've had the lockdown behind us, but we've got the imminent wage when the wage subsidy rolls off, we've got that ahead of us. So we're sort of in this sort of weird nether zone at the moment and sort of enjoy it while it lasts.
Okay. KiwiSaver, you got a bit of an update on that, because obviously some people were somewhat frightened when they looked at their KiwiSaver during these tumultuous times, but things are looking a little bit more healthy than they were a couple of months ago.
Yeah.
So what does that teach us?
Well, yeah, this will be some welcome news for those people who are furiously checking their KiwiSavers as we went into lockdown, as the markets really began to tumble. And we've got these new numbers from Morningstar. They're an investment research firm, and it shows that assets haven't just recouped their losses, it's actually and then some. At the end of the June quarter, assets were worth $66.5 billion, and compared with the results from the previous quarter, that's up by about $6 and a bit billion. So I should stress that for people that this may vary depending on how your KiwiSaver is set up, what funds you're investing in, but on the most part, a lot of people will be seeing some improvements, and this is just a massive indication for all those personal finance people who are telling all of us, to take it easy, take a breath, don't check your KiwiSaver. And just stay the course amid all this panic and market volatility. And for those people who did panic, it's probably a hard lesson there that maybe show your faith in your KiwiSaver fund that things will sort of level out in the end.
Okay, so what else was going on the markets today?
So the NZX Top 50 is up nearly 2/3% by 93 points to 11,692. The New Zealand dollar is down to 66.4 US cents, down to 92.7 Australian, and down to 51.2 British pence.
Down all round. Thanks,
Yeah, but
Nicholas.
gold is up though, so don't
gold,
worry,
okay.
everybody. Yeah, don't worry, everybody. Up to $1,961 an ounce.
Thanks, Nicholas. That's Nicholas Poynton with our business update. Victorians who have tested positive for COVID-19 have defied the stay-at-home order and continue to go to work and visit supermarkets and pharmacies. It comes after a record 723 new cases overnight and 13 deaths, the biggest since the pandemic began, with authorities warning of more hospitalisations and deaths in the coming days. And from midnight this Sunday, masks will be compulsory across the state as the virus spreads beyond Melbourne. And as Katie Doyle reports, all of this means the lockdown looks set to last beyond the remaining 3 weeks.
1 in 5 Victorians have now been tested for COVID-19. That's over 1.5 million tests and one of the highest testing rates in the world. But 3 weeks into Victoria's 6-week lockdown, the virus continues to take hold. 723 new cases overnight and 13 deaths, all people aged in their 70s, 80s and 90s. And Victoria Premier Daniel Andrews warned the picture is grim, especially for the elderly.
In terms of hospital, there are 312 Victorians in hospital, 34 of those are in intensive care. Aged care, there are a total of 913 active cases in aged care.
More than 30 teams from the Australian Defence Force are going door to door throughout Melbourne, checking if people who have tested positive are at home.
So they have door-knocked 798 properties. There were 269 that were visited yesterday. Now, I don't want this to be seen as criticism or blame, but I'm obliged to point out that there were a number of people who were not home. They will be referred to Victoria Police. There were also a number of other people who, when there was a discussion, the person that the ADF and the Health Department as a joint team were looking for, the person who has a confirmed diagnosis having coronavirus, they've got a positive test, they weren't home, but a family member was, and the family member helpfully pointed out that that person, a positive coronavirus case, was in fact at work.
Daniel Andrews said the message to stay home was not getting through for around 10% of the state's population. And some who had tested positive thought it was okay to go to work, visit a pharmacy to fill a prescription, or even pop to the supermarket.
Too many people are still going to work when they have symptoms. Too many people are going to work, even some, when they have a positive test result. That's a small number, though. I think a bigger number are people that are between having the test taken and getting the results. They are still presenting to work. And for so long as that continues, then we will continue to see numbers go up. The only way that numbers will come down and do so steadily is if people, when they are unwell, even very mildly unwell, go and get tested quickly and then isolate until they get their test result, and then, of course, based on that result, do as they're asked to do from that point onwards.
He warned businesses would pay the price if people did not stay home.
We will not get businesses reopened, and we will not see many businesses survive, which is what I want to achieve here. It's what we all want to achieve here, for so long as people continue to go to work when they are unwell.
More than 700 healthcare workers have now tested positive for the virus, and there are now 255 active cases in regional Victoria. From midnight on Sunday, face masks will be compulsory for all residents of Victoria, and from midnight tonight, residents in some regional towns and cities will no longer be allowed visitors in their homes. Despite this, Daniel Andrews said hospitality venues would remain open.
As I know that it may seem, as I said, counterintuitive that you can go to the pub but you can't go to your mate's place, but ultimately that's where the data drives that decision. The data drives that decision. That's where the transmission is. It's not in cafes and restaurants, but it is in small numbers in people's homes, one family to another.
Meanwhile, in New South Wales, 19 new cases were reported overnight, and 4 Sydney schools were closed today. Queensland reported 3 new cases, including 2 women who dined at the Apollo restaurant in Sydney's Potts Point and did not self-isolate on their return home. Queensland has said it will be closing its borders to all Sydney-siders from Saturday. For Checkpoint, I'm Katie Doyle.
It's 5:45. I'm Lisa Owen and you're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. Keen for your feedback, you can text us on 2101, tweet us at Checkpoint RNZ or send us an email, checkpoint@rnz.co.nz. The British government is under pressure to introduce coronavirus testing at airports to shorten the length of quarantine for returning travellers. Airlines and travel industry leaders say the tests are vital to the UK's post-COVID recovery, along with popular holiday spots like Mallorca, which have seen their tourism markets almost vanish. The BBC's Gavin Lee reports.
The Stewart family spent £5,000 hoping for a post-pandemic week in a deluxe villa. They were told the day before they arrived the hotel had closed. The only alternative was a theme park hotel.
Were you disappointed that the fact you couldn't go on the holiday we booked and we had to come here?
I was very disappointed.
Waited 2 years to come back, hadn't we? Saved up all that money.
Well, it means now I have to go 2 weeks without any pay. At work, I've been a key worker through the whole pandemic. I'm an essential key worker, so I'm gonna lose out.
Mallorca acted quickly when the pandemic first broke. It was the first airport in Spain to close. And on the Balearic Islands, including Menorca and Ibiza, they've seen just 2,000 cases in 5 months. And we're told that many businesses that only opened a week ago have now closed again because of the quarantine rule and the advice not to travel here. In the side streets of the capital, Palma, the tourism minister for the Balearic Islands says money from British holidaymakers has provided the backbone to the economy for decades.
No one in the UK seems to understand quite how much economic damage this quarantine measures is causing. In terms of the health risk, someone coming here will be far safer than in the UK.
One tourist returning home from Spain today, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps. He said the government had considered allowing quarantine-free travel to the islands.
We did have a look at whether certain islands could be included and not others. Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, was very clear with us that he was concerned about the data.
Across Spain, COVID cases are still rising, the majority in the northeast of the country. But the wish you were here appeals from politicians on these islands now appears to have been in vain. These shores are likely to stay quiet for some time.
And that was Gavin Lee reporting. Back home now, and Māori leaders want Oranga Tamariki to share its budget and resources with iwi organisations. And the Children's Commissioner agrees. A Waitangi Tribunal hearing has today heard how parts of the Oranga Tamariki Act still undermine the role of whānau, hapu and iwi in the protection of tamariki. And Māori leaders say if Oranga Tamariki worked in partnership with iwi organisations, it would allow them to better manage children and their families. Miriana Johnson was at the Waitangi Tribunal hearing.
True partnership would be Oranga Tamariki devolving its powers to a standalone Māori Tamariki Mokopuna Authority. That's what claimant and director of Māori health provider Te Kōhau Health, Lady Tereiti Moxon, told the tribunal this morning.
Māori are ready. We've been ready for a long time, and we are ready to take back our tamariki, and they need to give them back with the full resources and empowerment that it takes for us to do this mahi for ourselves.
She suggested Oranga Tamariki give half of its budget to iwi and Māori organisations in order to enable them to carry out the care of tamariki. The tribunal is seeking to answer 3 questions: why there has been such a consistent disparity of tamariki Māori being removed from their families, if legislative and practice changes have made that better, and what changes to Crown legislation might be required to uphold Te Tiriti or Waitangi. Coming under the microscope was a clause of the Oranga Tamariki Act introduced a year ago, which was designed to put the mana of the child, its whānau and whakapapa at the heart of all decisions about a child's future. However, family court lawyer Tanya Williams-Blythe told the tribunal that the process in which all subsequent children are removed from their family care, often without wider whānau input, runs counter to the mana of the child.
The whānau now have to prove that they can care for their subsequent children. The problem is that the child will probably be removed at birth, which is what has been happening. I have to say that the legislation is doing what it was designed to do. There's no surprises in the fact that the number of Māori babies being removed.
Ms Williams-Blythe wants the subsequent children aspect of the law to be removed. She says despite the promises of mana tamaiti, this is not happening.
We still have the idea that the child is an individual and an entity on its own as separate from its whānau hapu and iwi. No matter the rhetoric, no matter the sound bites, when the rubber hits the road, that misunderstanding and ignorance is alive and well.
Also called into question was the effectiveness of strategic partnerships between Oranga Tamariki and iwi. Children's Commissioner Andrew Beecroft says there needs to be a much stronger commitment in the legislation for Oranga Tamariki to share resources with iwi.
If what so many iwi around the country are saying they will do, if resourced in a proper way without the strings attached, then there's every hope to think there would be improvement. But let's make no mistake, at the moment, it's partnership only of a fashion. It's partnership where the power is still with the state.
He says the state also needs to make sure it provides ongoing support to mothers in order to prevent subsequent uplifts.
A mother's so desperate to have a second child or further children to show that she can be a mother and wants to be a mother. And one of the great problems, I think, I hear all around the country from NGOs and Māori organisations that when a child is removed, so is removed the funding. So the mother's left helpless.
Judge Andrew Beecroft says the Crown has failed Māori, although he says ultimately the tribunal would have the final say on that. The hearing will continue tomorrow. Mo te hōtaka o te Aihahi, ko Miriana Johnson, DNA.
It's around this time of year that students in their final year at high school would usually be preparing for their next step, be it university, an OE or heading into the workforce. But COVID has thrown a massive spanner in the works for many students, with career opportunities in some industries now few and far between. Our reporter Logan Church and cameraman Dom Thomas visited Wainuiomata High School to meet some school leavers and see what they plan to do after school.
For Year 12 and 13 students preparing to leave school, this time of year is usually preoccupied with figuring out what to do next.
Carpentry. A builder or sparky. I'm focusing on rugby.
Be a construction worker, tradie, anything.
But for some, COVID meant big changes. Studying at home was a real challenge.
During lockdown, it was just really difficult for me to study, as it would have been for a lot of people. But yeah, I thought it would have been easier, but nah.
While others struggled without access to a computer.
At the last 2 weeks I got a laptop where I could get onto it, I couldn't catch up, so I failed.
There are more than 600 students at Wainuiomata High School, which is a Decile 3 school. Cherie Holmes is the career counsellor here and says the discussions she has with school leavers have changed due to COVID.
In the past we've had a few students who have talked about going to university overseas or doing gap years overseas and things like that. So I've just it's funny, because we're in a beautiful bubble of New Zealand, it's not in our kids' face. It's not in our students' faces that actually there's a whole nother thing going on the other side of the world. When it comes to employment, those stock standard jobs like working in a cafe and those sorts of things are really hard to come by. Usually we would have students in year 12 and 13 who have part-time jobs, and that's not common anymore because there's people who have lost their jobs that are nabbing those jobs. So yeah, that's not common.
Here in the Hutt Valley, industries including events, hospitality and retail have been hit hard by COVID. The Hutt Valley Chamber of Commerce boss, Helen Down, says it's a scary time for many in the area.
I think with COVID-19 you can see that the young people are even more at risk, and it's harder for them to get into, or they feel it's harder for them to get into careers and understand their career paths and the options we've got around trades. So our work now is even more important because there's a lot of concern in the business sector. People are concerned about long-term employment. And young people are really concerned about what careers they're going to take on. So our work is really, really important.
Some of that work is part of a new program launched this week by the Chamber, which aims to connect schools with employers. The money for that has come from the government's plans to reform vocational education. Today, the students we met earlier are being shown around this 1,300-metre construction site in downtown Lower Hutt. Armstrong Downs Commercial Director Tony Doyle is leading the tour.
very happy to have Wainui High School students come out for a visit through the site. So always good for our industry to be able to showcase who we are and what we do, and really cool for the students to be able to see what's actually involved in a construction site, because they normally think with building it's all about swinging the hammer, but there's so much more to it than that.
Electricians, scaffolders, welders. Tony talks to the students through various career opportunities he can offer.
There's no way in the world I would have ever thought that I'd be in this position when I was your guys' age.
Careers NZ estimates up to 200,000 jobs will be lost in New Zealand due to COVID. Back at school, Cherie says she is directing her students towards jobs in sectors like construction, which she says offer more job security in a nationally volatile job market.
I am definitely directing them towards trades. Getting a qualification that is a trade, because I think there's a whole lot more security, job security in that. They've got a trade always, whether or not they want to use that trade in their future. If they get qualified in a trade, they've got that to always fall back on.
A new chapter for students in a new post-COVID world. For Checkpoint, Logan Church.
Amid dwindling numbers of international visitors, a novel attraction is helping lure Aucklanders to their city's most popular landmark. Twice a week at dawn, the country's highest yoga classes are underway high up the Sky Tower, populated by early birds from all walks of life. Reporter Katie Todd and camera operator Nick Monroe went along and filed this report.
It's dawn in the city of sails. We're a far stretch from the commuter chaos and the regular rat race. At 186 metres, 30 yogis can each claim their own slice of the skyline view and settle in for a slow series of downwards facing dogs, cranes and warriors.
And then just start to lengthen your spine, reaching the crown of the head up towards the sky. And if you find that your mind is quite busy, lots of thoughts buzzing around, just keep following your breath.
Leading these unique classes is Amanda Fell, who is no stranger to stretching at great heights, having previously instructed yoga at the Shard in London. That means this class can't claim the title of highest in the world, but it is the highest in New Zealand, and Ms Fell can vie for the title of Best Office. Off the back of a promotional event last year, the classes have been open to the public at $20. That's less than the regular cost of admission. She says they're proving extremely popular with practiced to first-time yogis.
We've just got a lot of people from our own backyard, and it's people who work in the city, some people who travel from far and wide just to come to the class, but yeah, all different types of people, from older to younger. It's amazing. It's a nice way to bring yoga to a wide range of people who wouldn't necessarily always practice yoga. Breathe out, hands through heart center, palms all the way to the mat.
The past year has brought two major setbacks for Sky City. Its under-construction convention centre was ravaged by a fire in October that burnt for 3 days. Now there's a distinct absence of overseas visitors amid COVID-19 border closures and travel restrictions, who Sky Tower coordinator Bridget Clark says would normally make up the majority of the people coming up the Sky Tower lifts.
This is our backyard. But a definite impact, but we'll keep going and we'll get our locals back.
And yoga's proving the winning combination.
I love having a view and having a vision while you're doing yoga. You know, instead of being at home in front of a screen or something, it was lovely to watch the sunrise. That really made a difference. It was really lovely.
This is super that be able to do this in the morning. Yeah.
Will you be back?
I think so, actually. Yeah, $20. It's can't get too much for $20 these days. So yeah, I think I'll be back. Yeah.
Really relaxing and good start to the day. It's really nice, waking up with the sun and the view, obviously.
Definitely, the view is really good.
Yeah, that's it. Breathe out. Warrior 3 and hold.
The yoga is set to continue every Wednesday and Thursday, and it's getting levelled up again next month with a series of disco-themed classes. In Auckland, for Checkpoint, Namaste, Katie Todd.
And if you're listening on radio, Katie's piece will go up on our Facebook page. A lot of you getting in touch about our earlier interview with a woman who pleaded guilty to escaping managed isolation. Martin kind of sums up a lot of your views. He says he's got sympathy for the woman's plight, but reckons that she showed a lack of compassion for the rest of New Zealand and no contrition about the risk she posed. Martin goes on to say, we're currently witnessing a slow train wreck across the Tasman because too many people are routinely non-compliant with lockdown and travel rules. Unless the New Zealand authorities toughen up and allow no quarter whatsoever for lockdown breaches, we are not only risk a wrong message being sent to returning New Zealanders in managed isolation, but we also risk widespread community transmission, as has happened in Melbourne. On the other side, though, this one says she shouldn't be punished. We need to have more compassion and show empathy. Another listener says, I'm sorry for this woman's loss, but she and her children have put other families at risk. Isolation is for the protection of the whole community.
RNZ News at 6, ngā mihi nui ko Susana Lei Atawa tēnei. A mother who has admitted escaping managed isolation with her 4 children says that she was left with no other option. The family returned from Australia after the children's father died unexpectedly. 4 members of the family have pleaded guilty to charges after climbing over a wall at their isolation hotel in Hamilton. The mother, who cannot be identified for legal reasons, has told Checkpoint she had applied for an exemption, but it felt like time was running out.
They told me they would give me a phone call at 4 o'clock. They told me they would give me a phone call at 5. They told me they'd give me a phone call at 6. Keeping in mind that the next morning he's about to be buried. And you also got to keep in mind that we have to transport his body it's an hour and a half from Auckland where he was laying and an hour and a half back. So, there's not much time to do all this.
The woman will be sentenced over her escape in August. A man has been charged under the COVID-19 Public Health Response Act after escaping from a managed isolation facility in central Auckland. The 32-year-old attempted to follow a staff member out of the gate of the Crown Plaza about 1 o'clock this afternoon, claiming he was a worker, but only got about 100 metres before being arrested. A city worker saw the drama unfold.
I think he tried to take off from the Crown Plaza, but he surely got stopped. Just had 2 army fellas trying to chase after him. Oh, they're in army clothing anyway. And then the police just come up and turn them around, put some handcuffs on them and walk them back. Yeah, his master's still over there. Hope someone picks it up. It's not going to be me anyway.
Police say the man was cooperative and was brought back to the facility. The Privacy Commissioner says he has no jurisdiction over MPs in response to the report into the COVID patient privacy breach. It found outgoing National MP Hamish Walker and former party president Michelle Bogue were solely responsible for putting the personal information of 18 people into the public arena, and it was politically motivated. Here's our political editor, Jane Patterson.
The report was referred to the Commissioner John Edwards to consider further action. He says he'll take the findings into account while doing a related inquiry. Furthermore, the people subject to the breach could still lay a complaint. Mr Edwards says, though, as Commissioner, he has no ability to issue penalties against individuals or organisations. The Health Ministry's contacted the 18 people to apologise, and changes have been made to make sure patient information has much more limited distribution. From Parliament, Jane Patterson.
The Waitangi Tribunal has heard how Oranga Tamariki can only achieve true te tiriti partnership if it devolves resources to iwi. An urgent hearing's underway into the agency's practices in relation to Tamariki Māori and whether they are compliant with te tiriti o Waitangi. The Children's Commissioner says there needs to be a much stronger commitment in the legislation for Oranga Tamariki to share resources with iwi. Andrew Beecroft says that there is every hope to think that there will be less tamariki going into state care if iwi are resourced properly without the strings attached. He says the Crown has failed Māori, but ultimately that's for the tribunal to decide. Police are terminating their contract with research company Gravitas after hackers stole information and contact details of New Zealanders who'd contacted authorities. It appears the hack originated in Nigeria and targeted business billing information contained in emails which were provided to the company for surveys. Assistant Commissioner Jevon McSkimming says any risk to people is low and no financial information was provided to Gravitas.
our IT systems have proven to be robust, and we'd expect the same of the people that supply services to us. And this has proven that we've lost confidence in Gravitas to continue with the contract with us.
Assistant Police Commissioner Jevon McSkimming. It's 6:04. The New Zealand Rugby League coach Michael Maguire expects to speak with Sonny Bill Williams about his international allegiance and hopes to have him available for the Kiwis. Williams is due to arrive in Sydney tomorrow for 2 weeks in quarantine before he makes his return for the Sydney Roosters in the lead up to the NRL finals. The Kiwis don't have any end-of-year tests locked in, but still hope to play at least 2 games later this year. Last year's Super Rugby runners-up, the Hawares, have released all of their top players because they can no longer afford their salaries due to the fallout of the coronavirus pandemic. Sports editor Stephen Hewson reports.
The Hawares have essentially operated as a shadow Argentina squad since joining Super Rugby 4 years ago. Their coach Gonzalo Quesada's already left to take over at French club Stade Francais, and 8 senior players, including the last 2 captains, Agustin Crevi and Geronimo de la Fuente, have also joined European clubs. Argentina's Boomers have almost exclusively been home-based players in recent years, but coach Mario Ledesma will now be able to pick overseas-based players should the planned Rugby Championship, due to be held in New Zealand in November, go ahead. This is Stephen Hewson.
Tonight's National Basketball League showdown semi-finals in Auckland start with a battle of the South Island, with the top-of-the-table Otago Nuggets playing the Canterbury Rams for a place in Saturday's final. In the other semi, the Manawatu Jets play the Taranaki Mountaineers. That's the news.
Take the pulse of the day's news every weeknight at 10.
One of the people who sold the land did get up to apologise to his community and explained what happened. For them, it wasn't really working out how they'd hoped it would, and an offer too good to be true came in, and so they took it.
Live with local, national and international stories as they happen.
The media don't like being told off like that, so I wonder quite how they'll respond.
Lately with Karen Hay every weeknight from 10 on RNZ National.
Now, the short forecast from Met Service to midnight tomorrow: Northland, Auckland, Coromandel, Bay of Plenty and Taupo. Mostly cloudy with isolated light showers. For the remainder of the North Island, areas of morning cloud or fog, otherwise mostly fine with high cloud. Nelson, Buller and Westland north of Fox Glacier, mostly cloudy with isolated light showers. Southern Westland and Fiordland, periods of rain, heavy at times tomorrow. Marlborough and Canterbury, mainly fine with high cloud. Areas of low cloud about the coast tonight. For Otago and Southland, mostly cloudy, scattered light rain, clearing for a time tonight. Chatham Islands, cloudy periods. RNZ National, coming up to 6:07.
Thanks, Susanna. If you're just joining us, this is Checkpoint and I'm Lisa Owen. And there is a new One News Colmar Brunton poll out, and our political reporter Joe Moyer joins us live from our parliamentary studio with the numbers. Joe.
Yeah, hi Lisa. So we've just had those numbers come through on One News, the Colmar Brunton poll. Now we've got Labour at 53, that is up 3 on the last Colmar Brunton poll. National sitting on 32, now they have dropped 6 points. The Greens are on 5 and ACT has also made it to 5, which is actually the highest in 17 years in that poll for ACT. And New Zealand First wouldn't be in this poll. They are on just 2 percentage points. Now, bear in mind that this is a poll that has come after 3 weeks of chaos, really, for the National Party and for Labour too. There's been resignations, there's been scandals, there's been leadership changes. This poll was taken from Saturday to midnight last night. Just to give you an indication of how seats would work in Parliament on those numbers, Labour would be able to govern alone. They would have 67 seats. They wouldn't need the Greens. Both the Greens and ACT would get 16 seats, so David Seymour would have 5 more friends in Parliament, and National would get 41 seats on that poll. In terms of the preferred Prime Minister, Jacinda Ardern comes in high at 54. It's the same, no change there as the previous poll. Judith Collins has come in at 20. Now, that's a big improvement on what both Todd Muller and Simon Bridges polled on. Interesting player too that's come into the preferred PM rankings. David Seymour, the ACT leader, has turned up on 1 as well.
OK, so while they're not directly comparable, obviously the News Hub Reid Research poll attracted a lot of attention on Sunday. Just remind us what their numbers look like.
So in terms of that poll, that ran from the 16th to the 24th of July. Now that obviously took in all of the stuff that happened with former National MP Andrew Falloon. It also took in Ian Lees-Galloway's resignation as well, though. Also in that period, Judith Collins took over as leader. Now on that poll, we had Labour at 60.9. That was up 4.4. That would have given them 77 seats. Obviously, Governor alone easily on that as well. The Nats were down to 25.1. Greens were on 5.7. ACT was on 3.3, which was the first time in that particular poll that they'd actually overtaken New Zealand First. And again, New Zealand First would have been out on that poll on 2.
Thank you, Joe. That is our reporter Joe Moyer there with the numbers from the One News Colmar Brunton poll. Now, to break this down further, I'm joined by Heather Roy, a political commentator and former ACT deputy leader, and Dave Cormack, a political commentator and former policy advisor to the Greens. First, can I come to you, Heather? What's your reactions to the number tonight, the numbers?
Well, this feels much more realistic than the poll 4 days ago, and I think that that most of the parties will probably agree with that, particularly the two major parties. I think it's worth bearing in mind that no party in the last 69 years, not since the 1951 election, which was very unusual because of the Watersiders strike, has got more than 50%, and I still don't think that any party will get more than 50% at this election.
Dave, does this mean that the News Hub Reid Research poll was rogue?
No, I don't think it does at all. If you look at where National went down from the last Reid Research poll, they actually dropped 5 points. And in this Colmar Brunton poll, they've actually dropped 6 points. So we're seeing a trend where they're going down in that 5-6 point range. And I think that headline number 25 to 32 can kind of bounce around depending on the day that you actually do the poll.
So obviously at the period that they were polling, this is the News Hub poll, there was a lot going on. There was Hamish Walker, Andrew Falloon, and it wasn't good for National at the time.
There hasn't been good news for National for quite a long time. I suppose this week's been good insofar as no one's resigned this week, so that could be considered a success. But I'm also told that there's actually a report coming back from Operation Burnham tomorrow, which isn't going to be good for National either. So I think there's just going to be more bad news continuing on, and I've never seen anything like it.
Heather, Judith Collins, will she be happy with that bump in her own personal rating there, 20% for preferred Prime Minister?
I think any upward trend will be very welcome, but I don't think she'll be happy with 20%. She'll be striving hard to lift that. But, you know, it's the party vote that's important, how the party does. And I think that I don't exactly agree with Dave, actually. I think that the last poll was an outlier, in my view. 1 in 20 by just reason of normal chance shows that there will be sort of quite obscure results from time to time. I think that was. And I just come back to the fact that I don't think any party in the current environment can get more than 50% at the election. So I think we can expect Labour to drop and National Party to rise. It's always interesting looking at the little parties too, the minor parties, and ACT will be a very happy camp tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. So with 51 days to go, what does National's strategy have to be then, Heather?
Well, I think National's always strong on the economy, or at least there's the perception that it's stronger on the economy. So I would hope to see something a bit new and revolutionary in the economic space. I'm not sure we're going to get that. I think we'd have to rely on ACT to provide that. But I think that people will look in the current environment with COVID disruption causing all sorts of havoc. People are going to be losing jobs. Bill English came out today saying that businesses need to prepare for a long period of low productivity and low everything really, and so I think National needs to pull something out of the bag in the economic space.
Dave, do voters pay attention to policy, or are they voting for a personality?
I think there's a bit of both, and we're seeing a real paucity of policy, unless you count National re-announcing road after road as a policy. But people respond well to the Prime Minister. They like her, and they really don't don't like it when she's criticised by other politicians. But at the same time, we're not being given an opportunity to judge policy. The only party that's really putting out any policy at the moment is the Greens, and they're kind of hovering in their only just safe zone. So it's really hard to ascertain if there is an appetite for it. Labour, of course, don't want to put out much policy because they're up over 50%, so why risk alienating anybody? National are kind of in dire straits and need to do something, so I'm sure there'll be a 10-lane road announced in the next few days. But we're just not getting anything.
Dave, do you actually think that is Labour's strategy?
Yeah, I do. I mean, they've basically said they're not going to give out much until much closer to the election, and why would you risk alienating some of that soft centre-right vote that's come over to your side by doing something that's left-wing? I think it's going to be a really boring home stretch from Labour.
Heather mentioned it's potentially good news for the minor parties, but as you point out, the Greens hovering around 5%. Will they be happy with that?
No, they'll probably want to get that up around 6 or 7, and we might see that if some of that soft left Labour vote feels secure enough that they can peel off and go to the Greens. But also at the same time, I'm not certain if ACT is going to be overjoyed with getting at 5%, because I think there are some concerns that the talent kind of starts to thin out at quite high number placings. So while 5 sounds good in theory, maybe they'd be more comfortable around the 2 or 3 MP mark rather than 6.
Heather, is there a lack of depth in ACT's list?
I don't know people beyond number 5 particularly well, but I think that they won't be displeased with this 5%. They'll be very happy that the hard work that they have put in, David Seymour particularly on his own for all those political periods, is finally being rewarded for that. I think the Greens will be unhappy with 5%. They traditionally poll on polling day, on election day, quite a bit less than the polls dictate. So if that's the case, they would be out of Parliament on this. And I think we shouldn't discount the Maori Party either. My prediction, if we're often mad to give them, but I think that we're going to end up with a 4-party parliament after the election. If there's a 5-party parliament, I think that'll be the Maori Party will be the 5th party there, possibly with an overhang by winning 1 or 2 electorate seats.
So you're calling time on New Zealand First, Heather?
You can never count Winston out, but there is a significant trend now from the recent polls showing that they're only around 1.5 to 2%, so they're in trouble.
So, Dave, just before we go, I'll put you on the spot. Is Winston Peters and New Zealand First going to make it back in?
I think New Zealand is due some good luck, so no, I don't think they will.
Thank you both for joining us. That is Heather Roy, political commentator and former ACT Deputy Leader, and Dave Cormack, who is also a political commentator and he was a former policy advisor to the Greens. They're talking about the One News Colmar Brunton poll. And just to recap those numbers for you, National came in at 32%, Labour at 53%. Judith Collins gets 20% in the preferred Prime Minister stakes, and Jacinda Ardern remains at the 54% that she got in the last Colmar poll, which was around June 25th. It is almost 17 minutes past 6. You're with Checkpoint on RNZ National. The Privacy Commissioner is investigating the COVID-19 patient privacy breach to see whether any further action can be taken following the release of a report that's confirmed political motives and National Party players were behind the leak. An inquiry headed by Mike Heron QC has laid the blame for circulating the private details of patients with the coronavirus on outgoing National MP Hamish Walker and the National Party's former President Michelle Bogue. None of the media outlets which received the leaked patient details published them. I asked Privacy Commissioner John Edwards what more he can do.
I'm interested in exploring the original basis for the distribution of that COVID, diagnostic information and how wide that was, how the policy was conceived and executed, and whether it was reviewed in a sufficiently timely way.
So do you have concerns about how this patient material was distributed and who it actually went to? Even legitimate agencies?
Yes, I do. I raised some concerns with the ministry way back in April, and I've been going through a process with them and another agency to try and understand what the needs of different agencies have been and how those have been met, and whether that's proportionate to the threat that's been faced. What I intend to do is to widen that investigation to incorporate the distribution to other emergency services, and just to see what the rationale was, what the basis for that was, and certainly we see from Mr. Heron's report and other commentary that there was a real crucible of urgency and concern at the early stages of the pandemic's presence in New Zealand and as we went into lockdown. So I need to be a little bit sensitive about the kind of hindsight I bring to that. But also, it is important that all the agencies involved take the lessons from this for the next time we have this kind of experience.
But from what I understand and the report, it was distributed with zero encryption, no password protection at all, and was simply sent by email. Is that correct?
I think that's what Mr. Heron found, and to me that's a secondary issue. So the primary one is there a good reason for this distribution, and then the second one, were the security measures taken adequate to protect it? And then, of course, just looping back to your very first question, is there anything else that I might do? The State Services Commissioner has specifically referred to me the actions of Ms. Bogue, Mr. Walker, and the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust. Now, given the sorts of findings that Mr. Heron has made, I'm not sure that I will be able to bring too much more light to those actions, but I am very interested in finding out whether any of the individuals whose information was included are interested in pursuing remedies, because if they are, then I would certainly begin an investigation. I haven't yet decided whether to begin a process of my own motion, but that's something that I'll be thinking over in the next 24 hours or so.
Hamish Walker, as an MP, you have no control over him in terms of privacy regulations, do you?
No, that's pretty clear. I am able to investigate the actions of an agency, and that term agency is defined in the Privacy Act really broadly, so it covers almost everyone in the economy, but then it's further defined by exclusion. So it said agency does not include a Member of Parliament in their official capacity. So I don't really think there is room for me to look at those actions and to help anyone who's suffered to obtain any remedies from Mr. Walker.
What about in the case of Michelle Bogue? Would you have the option of remedies there if someone were to complain? Again,
that would be something that I'd think about. I mean, it appears from the report that Ms. Bogue was acting as Chief Executive of the Auckland Rescue Helicopter Trust, and as such, that agency might well bear liability. There is a chance that they might say, well, we had all the protections and processes in place, and this person simply went around them. Again, that's a matter for investigation. I would need to be fair to all the parties and hear what they had to say. But we have had cases before where an individual officer of an organisation is held accountable separate and apart from the overall agency. So there's a chance that there could be liability on both Ms. Bogue and the Trust, or either of them.
And what remedies would be available to you then?
Well, I don't have, this is something that's pretty widely misunderstood, I think. I don't have any ability to dole out penalties or punishment.
And that is the point, isn't it? Because in some ways it's like, wow, what do they get? A slap across the wrist with a wet bus ticket?
Yeah, so I can talk you through that. As I say, I can't go out and read the Riot Act and issue punishments and penalties. My role as Privacy Commissioner is to see if there's some substance to the complaint, and if there is, to work with the parties to try and achieve a resolution. So it's a very much dispute resolution-oriented system at the moment. If we get to the end of a process and we've been unable to resolve it to the satisfaction of the parties, I can then refer it on to another independent officer called the Director of Human Rights Proceedings. They can then bring proceedings in the Human Rights Review Tribunal, and that judicial body has jurisdiction to award damages of up to $300,000.
And that's the Privacy Commissioner, John Edwards. Long-time National MPs Nikki Kaye and Amy Adams have given their valedictory speeches in Parliament. Both were elected into Parliament 12 years ago and between them have held a plethora of ministerial portfolios. Nikki Kaye announced her resignation soon after losing the deputy leader role following the shock resignation of Todd Muller. Nikki Kaye spoke about her pride of being a blue-green politician.
It is the toughest moments of my personal life that have helped me be able to be a better Member of Parliament and Cabinet Minister. Through my parents breaking up young, a stepbrother being charged with murder, being diagnosed with breast cancer at 36, I have learned when your world breaks and shatters, you can be your most powerful. Random strangers in the role reach out and pick you up. Thank you to the many New Zealanders who, through their messages, picked me up.
But Nikki Kaye says her proudest achievement of becoming Education Minister almost didn't happen.
In 2016, I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And as I've said before, my world broke. I tried to resign, and the only reason that I was able to become Minister of Education was that John Key, as I cried my eyes out, said, "You're not f***ing going anywhere."
Amy Adams reinstated her resignation following the change of leadership, but she acknowledged the elephant in the room.
It's always good to hold some of the firsts in this place, and I'm pretty sure that I'm the first MP to have retired, unretired, and then re-retired, all without actually leaving.
She also spoke about the toll Parliament can take.
In my time in this House, I have dealt with the death of both of my parents and my two remaining grandparents. I've witnessed the devastation in my electorate through the Canterbury earthquakes, the Port Hills fire, and more recently the mosque shootings. I've received death threats and abuse, and I've seen my children have to deal with the relentless negativity and lies that are aimed at us through the media and social media alike. And yet not for a moment do I think it all hasn't been worth it.
Amy Adams finished her speech with advice for those who follow her. Be brave, stand up on the divisive issues and never lose sight of the difference you can make. If you're just joining us, there's a One News Colmar Brunton political poll out this evening. It puts National on 32% support, Labour on 53%. Judith Collins scored 20% in the preferred Prime Minister stakes and Jacinta Ardern was sitting on 54%. The Green Party and ACT were on 5%. Now, the two polls are not comparable, but the Reid Research poll, which came out on Sunday night, had National at 25%, Labour on 60%, with Judith Collins on just over 14.5% in the preferred Prime Minister stakes, and Jacinta Ardern on 62%. So make of that what you will. And of course, there was the leaked National Party internal polling that said Labour was on about 50% and National was around 36%. Crews on iron ore export ships headed overseas from Australia could be stuck on board for more than a year thanks to COVID restrictions. The shipments travel between Western Australia and China, but unions are sounding the alarm about conditions on board as quarantine measures prevent workers from coming ashore. The ABC's Karen Mitchell-Moore reports.
Hey boys! Heavy!
Paul Hogan is making an unusual delivery.
No problem.
He's from the Port Hedland Seafarers Centre and he's dropping shopping bags filled with groceries, chocolate and phone cards to the crew of a massive iron ore carrier that's docked in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. He's not allowed on board. Instead, two masked crew members lower a rope to haul up the canvas bags.
It's just good to see that they're really happy to be able to get something. I feel sorry for the guys on there. You know, some have been on there for 14 months. They miss their families and this is just a bit of a treat for them. Thanks, boys. Thank you. Stay safe, safe sailing.
Port Hedland is the largest iron ore port in the world, and the shipments loaded here for China are a crucial export earner for Australia. But because of border restrictions and quarantine measures, crew members are not allowed to come ashore. Even getting off the boats and home once their contracts end is difficult. Dean Summers is from the International Transport Workers Federation in Australia.
We know that seafarers are suffering terribly from mental health, from isolation, and we hear daily that captains and chief engineers, senior officers on these ships are screaming and crying out for help.
The Australian Maritime Safety Authority is allowing crews to serve a maximum 14 months on board a vessel, although some have been working for up to 17. In a statement, a spokesman for the Deputy Prime Minister and Transport Minister, Michael McCormack, says the federal government has been working with state governments, port operators, industry and unions to put arrangements in place to enable crew changes to occur. WA Ports Minister Alana McTiernan says she's working with the industry to investigate charter flights, but believes shipping companies should pay to change their crews when they reach their destination in China or Singapore.
It really has been to a significant extent cost-cutting and not being prepared to incur the additional expense that is necessary to replace these crews.
For now, crew members are having to rely on an online shop and deliveries being run by John Haig from the Port Hedland Seafarers Centre, who has joined the union's call for them to be allowed to come ashore.
A happy crew is a safe crew. Safe crew is a safe ship. Safe ships shift good loads out of the country. For a ship to go array or people to break down and that supply chain to be broken, no iron ore goes out of this country. I just don't think people realise how important seafarers are to this country.
And that is John Haig from Port Hedland Seafarers Centre, ending that report from the ABC's Karen Mitchell-Moore. A lot of you still getting in touch about the interview we did with the woman who escaped from managed isolation. This person says distressing experience, but she failed the system, not the other way around. Another listener says quarantine is not pleasant and she was in a horrible predicament, but she made the wrong decision and put the country at risk. Another person says, I feel for the woman and her family who wanted to get out of isolation to see their loved one, but this was selfish. I am tired of people making excuses for their behaviour. The safety of others is more important than an individual. And this listener says, Lois says, unfortunately, people in New Zealand also suffered loss of loved ones and dealt with the stress of lack of final goodbyes too. Checkpoint back, same time, same place, tomorrow.
RNZ News headlines at 6:30. A just-released poll has Labour at 53% and National on 32%, with ACT at its highest result in 17 years at 5%. A woman who escaped a Hamilton-managed isolation facility says she was doing what she had to for her children. The Privacy Commissioner says if any individuals whose information was shared by Michelle Bogue and Hamish Walker want to take further action, he would begin an investigation. And the Waitangi Tribunal has heard how Oranga Tamariki can only achieve true Te Tiriti partnership if it devolves resources to iwi. Those are the headlines. Our next news is at 7.
Tonight on Nights, in episode 4 of The Unthinkable, choosing to have another child after the unthinkable happened to the first one. William Yang is on the line from Taiwan, but he's probably got his eyes on Hong Kong. Our toxicologist Leo Shep tackles cannabis, and Veronica Moore